When we hear the phrase witch hunt, most of us picture something pretty specific. A few strange trials in a small Puritan town, a handful of women in pointy hats, maybe Salem, maybe a spooky play. A couple of hangings, some old superstitions, and then it all just sort of stops. But the real witch hunts? They were much bigger, much more organized, and far more gruesome and violent than most people ever learn. Between the 1400s and 1700s, tens of thousands of people, probably between 40,000 and 60,000, were executed as witches across Europe and its colonies. Many more were tortured, humiliated, or left in prison to die. And what's most disturbing is not just how they died, but how normal the whole thing looked to the people doing it. To really see how horrifying this was, we need to forget Salem for a moment and step into the world that made the witch hunts possible. The world before the fire. For most of medieval history, witchcraft was a vague crime. People believed in magic, curses, and charms. They always had. A cow died, your child got sick, your neighbor's bread didn't rise. Maybe someone had cursed you. But most of the time, authorities treated this like a minor sin or a superstition. A priest might scold you, you might do a penance, but you didn't automatically get burned alive. That changes in the late 1400s. Europe is in crisis. Plagues keep returning, wars devastate the land, famines come and go, religious authority is being questioned. When people feel powerless, they go searching for an enemy they can fight. And the idea slowly forms that witches are not just weird neighbors with herbs and bad attitudes. They're part of a conspiracy. Not just any conspiracy, a secret army in league with the devil himself, working to destroy Christian society from the inside. How witches became an existential threat. If you want a symbol for this new idea, it's a book. In 1487, two German inquisitors publish a book whose Latin title means The Hammer of Witches. It's basically a how-to manual for hunting witches, how to recognize them, how to interrogate them, how to destroy them. It insists that witches are everywhere, poisoning wells, killing babies, destroying crops, making men impotent, and having sexual pacts with demons. And crucially, it says, if you don't hunt them, you're letting the devil win. Most people today have never heard of this book, but its ideas spread. They merge with local fears and rumors, and slowly, a new logic takes hold. If anything terrible can be blamed on witches, and witches are servants of Satan, then failing to go after them is practically treason against God. The stage is set for what follows. The machinery of a witch hunt. Let's put ourselves now into a small town in early modern Europe. A child dies suddenly, a storm destroys the harvest, or maybe two neighbors have been fighting for years and one of them finally snaps. An accusation is made. At first, it might sound like this. She looked at my baby and the next day he was sick. Ever since she argued with me, my cow won't give milk. I saw him muttering over strange papers by candlelight. On their own, these complaints look petty. But in a world obsessed with the devil, they sound deadly serious. The local authorities, maybe town magistrates, maybe a church court, open an inquiry. They've read about witch conspiracies. They know that witches deny everything at first. So if the accused keeps saying, "I'm innocent," that doesn't calm them. It makes them more suspicious. The logic flips. Denial becomes evidence. The accused is arrested. Often it's at night. They may be dragged from their homes, leaving children behind, property to rot. Sometimes they're kept in underground cells, chained to walls or floors. Food is minimal, sleep is controlled. This is the start of the process, not the end. Because witch hunts weren't usually chaotic mobs with torches, they were procedures, step-by-step systems that mixed law, theology, and violence. Torture as proof. We tend to think torture is something done by secret police in dark rooms, but in many witch trials, torture was legal, regulated, and documented. It looked, on paper, like part of a rational investigation. Interrogations might begin gently. Do you renounce the devil? Have you ever attended a witch's Sabbath? Who taught you these things? When the accused refuses to confess, the judge can authorize enhanced methods. They had rules about it. You shouldn't technically draw blood. You shouldn't technically kill them under torture. In reality, those lines got blurry fast. They might be strapped to a rack, joints pulled until they felt they would rip, hoisted by the arms behind the back, weights tied to their feet, kept awake for days, questioned endlessly, collapsing into delirium. And here's the key. Confession is the only way out. If you keep denying you're a witch, they assume the devil is giving you supernatural strength to resist. If you confess, they prove that witches exist, that their fears were justified, and they move on to the next step. So most people break. They confess to impossible things, flying through the air, kissing demons, cursing neighbors they liked. Under agony and exhaustion, they say whatever the interrogators already half believe. But it doesn't end there. Once you confess, they ask, who else was there? Who else is in the coven? To stop the pain, people start naming names. The machinery of violence turns one person's broken body into a weapon pointed at their friends, neighbors, even their own family. Wyatt was especially gruesome. So far, this sounds brutal enough, but there are parts of the story that are even more disturbing. First, the scale. Some regions executed just a few people, others turned into killing zones. In parts of what's now Germany and Switzerland, individual towns might burn dozens of witches in a single year. In some places, entire families were wiped out. Second, the gendered violence. Not all victims were women, men were accused and killed too. But in many regions, the majority were female. That meant the witch hunts often turned into a socially acceptable way to punish women who didn't fit the mold. Widows who owned property, healers and midwives, outspoken or quarrelsome women, women whose fertility, sexuality or independence unsettled their neighbors. Part of the examination involved searching the body for a witch's mark, a mole, a scar, a patch of discolored skin where a demon supposedly suckled. This search could be invasive and humiliating, often done by male officials, sometimes in front of witnesses. Third, the community betrayal. We have this idea that witches were always outsiders, but often the accused were people who'd lived in the village for years. They'd traded goods, attended church, helped deliver babies, raised children alongside their accusers. When things spiraled, children testified against parents, husbands abandoned wives, entire neighborhoods turned on a single house. And finally, the public spectacle. Executions were not discreet. They were staged. People gathered to watch. Bells might toll. Authorities made speeches. In some places, witches were hanged. In others, they were burned at the stake, sometimes strangled first, sometimes not. The fire was supposed to purify, to erase any physical trace of the witch and prevent their body from becoming a cursed relic. For the crowd, it was part punishment, part warning, part morbid entertainment. For the person in the flames, it was the end of a long, slow destruction that had started weeks or months earlier in the torture chamber. Case study, not just Salem. To understand how far this could go, it's worth zooming in on just one example. Imagine a small town in Central Europe in the 1620s. Bad harvests have followed war and disease. Rumors spread. Someone must have cursed the fields. A woman who has been at the edge of village life, poor, older, maybe already whispered about, is accused. The pattern unfolds. She's arrested, interrogated, and tortured. She confesses that she attended a witch's Sabbath. Under pressure, she names others, a neighbor, a cousin, the midwife. Those people, in turn, are arrested. Under torture, they name still more. Within months, a town that previously had no witches suddenly has a network of them. Over a few years, dozens may be executed. The town records show line after line, so-and-so, convicted of witchcraft, burned. No demons, no real magic, just a self-feeding system of fear, pain, and accusation that eats people alive. Salem, which we talk about constantly, killed 20 people. In some European hunts, you could see that number in a week. What witch hunt really means. Today, we use witch hunt to mean a lot of things. Sometimes it's used casually, a social media dogpile, a political scandal, people being unfairly targeted. Sometimes that comparison is fair, often it's not. But if we want to use the term at all, we should remember what the original witch hunts really were. They weren't just bursts of irrational superstition, they were deeply organized systems of violence backed by laws, judges, theologians, and bureaucrats. Powered by fear, but also by very practical motives: property disputes, family rivalries, local politics. Fueled by torture, which turned human beings into unreliable sources that kept the panic going. Gendered and humiliating, especially for women whose bodies became battlegrounds for the community's anxieties. And maybe most troubling of all, they were done by people who, in almost every other area of life, saw themselves as decent, moral, God-fearing. That's the part that makes the witch hunts truly frightening, because it means you don't need cartoon villains or people cackling over cauldrons to create horror. You just need fear, authority, and a story that says, these people are not really people. They're dangerous, and if we don't stop them, everything we care about will be destroyed. Once that story takes hold, cruelty can start to feel like duty. The witch hunts faded in the 18th century as legal systems changed, scientific thinking grew, and the idea of confessions under torture became harder to defend. But the basic pattern, find a hidden enemy, torture the truth out of them, use that truth to find more enemies, never fully disappeared. We see versions of it in political purges, in moral panics, in any movement that divides the world cleanly into the pure and the damned. So when we look back at the witch hunts, we shouldn't just see them as a weird, distant superstition. We should see them as a warning. The next time someone casually calls something a witch hunt, remember, the original witch hunts were not just unfair. They were a slow, systematic way of turning ordinary fear into extraordinary violence. One accusation, one confession, one body at a time.